Hey, how's it going, everybody? Today we're going to talk about some of the response strategies to positive behavior. And so we're going to talk about how to de-escalate when problem behavior occurs, because we can't prevent every problem in the world. And so how do we de-escalate some of that behavior? Now, in the future, we'll talk about teaching positive behavior and some of those more preventative strategies, some of those real direct things on how to correct behavior. But right now, we just want to give you some quick tricks, if you will, about how to really knock down some of that behavior when it occurs, so we can get back on the right track and be positive. So the first thing we did in the class is we had people share out their homework, their 5-to-1 homework from last week. And I really enjoy what the teachers shared with the group. And one of the things that they shared was one teacher came in and she said, I tried it with my class. And so what I did was I started the class with saying a positive thing about the class. And she said it turned the whole class around. That kids were more engaged, the class was just more positive, and behavior really ceased to exist, problem behavior. And so really changed that tone of the class, and I think that's very powerful. I think when we think of positive behavior, starting the class with something positive can be a very good strategy. Another teacher, what she did was she focused on the kids that don't get enough positive. So they do the right thing all the time, but they don't get enough. And so she focused on, I'm going to give those kids more positive praise. And what happened was that she said, those kids, they were kind of like, whoa, you notice that? You notice when I do these things? And really fostering that leadership quality in those kids and fostering that we notice when you go above and beyond. We notice that, you're trying to help out other kids. And you may not get as much reinforcement, but we notice that. And that's very powerful too. And so be strategic in how you use your positive statements. Be strategic in where you put them and what you do. I mean, be very liberal with them. But you can see that with different situations, over time, students are going to respond positively and vary in a different way if you can use them. If you can use them liberal and use them very tactfully. I hope that people really take away, some of the relief of the positive approach. That teacher that said she opened the class with a positive praise statement said, it felt so good to just step back and relieve myself of trying to control behavior. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about how that positive approach just allows us, there's some scared feeling of relinquishing control. But there's a very positive feeling in that once you relinquish it, you say, I cannot control behavior. And you relinquish that, you become so much more in control. Because you figure out, this is how I can use these positive things. And I'm positive all the time. And so it will really change the tone of your class. It will change the tone of your school. It will change the tone of yourself. And that's one thing that you got to take away, is that you do this enough times, you become a more positive person that people want to be around, people want to listen to, and people want to follow. And so let's go into some more of this. We're looking at, I just wanted to share this with you because she mentioned she walked in and had that praise statement. And so we know she felt that power. I really want to share with you how powerful that is, which is kind of amazing. But teachers that greeted middle school students at the door by name and said one positive thing, like, hey, John, it's good to see you today. Before class, increased student engagement by almost 30% on average, just by greeting them at the door. Just by saying their name and something good, starting it off with a positive statement, increased engagement by almost 30%. That's huge. So we've talked about how powerful these praise statements are, and they are powerful, and we'll keep going back to them throughout the whole class. But really getting at how powerful they are. And now we're looking at, we talked about the 5 to 1, we talked about praise statements. Well, in order to really have a lot of praise statements, we got to do stuff. And so what we're going to shift now is to not talking about doing, but to do. And if we do and we coach positive behavior in the moment or as we're doing things, then student behavior can change that much more. So you have nothing to talk about if you don't do anything. So we're going to look at how to do things. If we're doing it right, it should feel like this. It should feel like, man, we are connected to a community. We are connected to a school. We are connected to all of our students. And all of our students are connected to us and each other and the school. If we are doing positive behavior support right, it should feel like this. It should not feel like this. We should not feel alone where we're trying to control behavior all by ourselves, where we're being overwhelmed emotionally. And we're just, putting our finger in the dam where I'm trying to stop one behavior here and another one pops up. And I'm trying to stop another one over here and another one pops up. If coaching behavior feels like a struggle, if you feel like, man, I wish, a pipe broke in the school today so we didn't have school, you aren't connected. And you have to adjust what you're doing. And it can be very scary to relinquish that control. But once you do that, and once you go positive, you can really change the lives of your students. You can change the climate of your classroom. You can just change a lot of things. You can help them be more independent. You can help coach a lot of really great skills. And so how do we do that? We talked about the 5 to 1. Way powerful. Greeting kids at the door. Way powerful. But we need to communicate value and support in other ways. We mentioned we don't do this all the time by talking. We can't just talk about these things because we're going to run out of stuff to talk about if we're never around when kids are doing things. So have you ever had that experience where you tell a kid, you need to do this, 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 and this, and then you put them off into the wild and they just totally forgot what you told them to do? This happens because they have practiced these skills in the moment. And so instead of just talking about it, we're going to lead by doing. We're going to create those connections by doing. And then we're going to maybe narrate some of those things of what we're doing, what our thought process is, those types of things. But we are going to be in the moment instead of sitting down, talking about why they did what they did, talking about doing things differently next time. We're going to do that. We're going to provide support in the moment, and we are going to actively teach all the time. And this will become natural, and it will become easy if we do it over time. Not by talking, but by doing. So the way we become a reinforcer is we pair ourselves with desirable activities or with food. Good examples of this in school are cafeteria. When kids are eating, it's a great time to take some time out, sit next to kids, hang out, watch things, participate a little bit, or during recess, play a little bit, or just even be there. Have those experiences with kids so you can talk about them. You can celebrate them. You can celebrate kids for doing things other than in your class. Going to basketball games, going to community events, those type things. You can create a relationship with kids. Now, what happens is when you pair yourself with pleasurable experiences like eating or like pleasurable activities or just pleasurable experiences in general, you do that enough times, we call that being the M&M. So you want to be the reinforcer eventually. And the way you do that is you pair yourself with that reinforcement. If you pair yourself enough times with that reinforcement, when those pleasurable activities are not there, or when that, food is not there, what happens eventually is that in your class, they're going to associate you, your school, everything with positive feelings. And so they're going to be more likely to take a demand, to do something that's very hard for them. Because this is a pleasurable experience. And so you're telling me to do this? Okay, I'm more likely to do it. Now, I think the best example of a story that I have with this one is there's an old man in my hometown that was named Joe Fox. And he knew me since I was a little kid. And throughout all my years, we probably spoke the words max to each other, but had a fantastic relationship. I loved that guy and he loved me. And what was it? We didn't even talk. Well, Joe was there for every positive experience of my life. He was there through every basketball game. He was there every Sunday at church. He was there in every community event. And all he'd say when I walked through the door was, "Cody." And I'd sit down next to him and we'd watch powwows together. We'd watch basketball games together. We'd just sit together. And we wouldn't hardly say anything. We wouldn't talk about anything, wouldn't do anything. And just by being together in a positive experience, created a bond between us. And he is a man that I look up to, that I revered, and it was just because of his presence. So merely by exposure during positive events, we can have profound impacts on students. Now it means we have to go above and beyond a little bit because you have to teach. You can't just create fun activities in your class all the time. But if you take some time to do that, it can be very powerful, especially with kids that you may not have a good relationship with. You take some time to get to know them outside of class. It doesn't mean you got to talk about other things. It doesn't mean you got to talk about if they like Spider-Man or if they like whatever. But just, what are they interested in? And then go and be in that. And act with them. So we talked about, some of the 5-to-1, pairing yourself with positive experiences, some of those prevention strategies that really are the foundation to teaching positive behavior. And we'll talk about teaching positive behavior in the next class, but not today. And I really want to talk about 5 response strategies. So 5 ways to, when behavior becomes escalated, to de-escalate that behavior. But before we do that, I want to switch gears. I want to really talk about the next step before we talk about response strategies. I really want to get into what these things look like and how to de-escalate that behavior. And to do that, you need to understand the escalation curve. So here's a graphic that depicts what happens when students become escalated and exhibit severe behavior. And so we look at adult makes a request. And I want to say that when I mean escalation, it doesn't mean the kid is kicking out of control. That is the peak of escalation. Escalation means you make a demand, they don't follow through with it. If we treat that as an escalated behavior, we can catch things when they're very small. And so adult makes a request, youth doesn't do it. So simply just doesn't do it, doesn't throw anything on the ground, doesn't say no, doesn't say anything, just doesn't do it. So what we do is we increase our demand. And we say, no, you will do that. Or we present the demand again. And the youth says, no, I won't do that. Either verbally or non-verbally by, pushing a thing, or you guys have experienced that. And then the adult continues with the demand. So you say, no, you will do that. And then the youth scream, yells, has a tantrum. That's where we get some of that more physical aggression, verbal aggression, whatever that is. And we get to the peak of escalation. Well, in that situation, then what happens? The adult feels angry, feels hopeless, feels like there's nothing I can do to control this behavior. And there isn't. You can't control that behavior. And so you either forgive or you give in. And then the youth either feels remorseful, ashamed, because you had this big negative experience that has breached your relationship, or they feel reinforced. They feel like, man, I got my way. That was exactly what I wanted. And then it subsides. So notice the stars on there. The teaching opportunities are before and after the problem. Preferably before, because we want to prevent it. And so when we think about that, if you want to teach in the moment, you can't do it. They're escalated. And even if they're not at the peak of their escalation, you can't teach in the moment, because they become escalated, and there's nothing you can do but de-escalate that behavior. So instead, what we want to do is we want to keep small problems small. So when they don't follow through with a demand, we want to have strategies that keep that problem small and not getting into a big physical aggression mess. So our job is to prevent that behavior from occurring or from becoming severe. And so when we look at these things, we're going to look at our 5 methods to de-escalate that behavior. So to get from even getting to the peak of that, we're going to prevent all those things from happening. And even if they are very escalated, we're going to employ these strategies that we're going to employ these strategies so that kids can handle their behavior. Now, one way to do that, and we often when students become escalated, when they get upset, when they do those things, we match their emotions. So when they're exhibiting that negative behavior, we raise our voice. We, become more out of control. Our heart starts racing. Those types of things. When that happens, we got to stop. We got to stop and model and de-escalate ourselves. Check our emotional self. Calm ourselves down. Separate our emotional self from the situation, which can be hard to do sometimes. But we calm down, and if we display our behavior in a calm, controlled, collected manner, that youth will match our behavior. So usually, sometimes just simply doing that can de-escalate the behavior. Catching ourselves, giving a demand in a low neutral tone, or just doing something in a calm way and ignoring some of that major behavior can get them to de-escalate. So when we talk about stepping back and not putting our finger in that dam to try and control that water from bursting out, I hear a lot of teachers say that. I hear a lot of teachers say, I fix one problem, then the other one pops up. And I fix another problem, and another one pops up. And I can't get control of it. Well, what we're here to do in positive behavior is to step back from that. And sometimes a chaotic room is okay. Because you're not going to if the whole room is chaotic, you're not going to get it under control by correcting behavior until you lose control. And students either become scared or they follow through and they have a level of fear. But we don't want to rule by. So what we want to do is we want to step back, just like we're saying, and check, because that's when the room is chaotic. We should treat that as it is becoming escalated. So whether it's a kid or whether it's your room or whether it's whatever, the situation is becoming escalated. And if you think about it like an emergency situation. So, it's not life or death, but when you think of an emergency situation, what do you first do? You first become calm and you act strategically. The same thing happens in a chaotic room. So you don't allow yourself to get sucked into chaos. Dangerous situation. You allow yourself to get sucked into that chaos, what's going to happen? Dangerous things are going to happen. You're going to make mistakes. You can get somebody hurt. Same thing with a chaotic room. Same thing with a student who's escalated. You step back. You're going to step back. You're going to stay positive. And a good strategy is step back, restate the expectation. If, there's nobody doing what you want them to do, restate the expectation. Once somebody does it, one person, there's always got to be that one person that will. Once they do it, reinforce that. And just start going on with what you're doing. Start teaching, start whatever. Reinforce it as people start to come back. You're ignoring all that around you. As they start to come back, then you're reinforcing more and more and more and more and more. And then what happens is eventually you get it down to, maybe that one kid. That's the ringleader. Or maybe that, but you get all the players out of it. All the kids that are usually pretty good kids. You get them to start create that community positive support. And then you have one kid that you have to deal with, which is a lot easier than having a whole class. So what we want to do is we want to stay away from the criticism trap. Stay away from correcting, trying to teach behavior when it's out of control. We want to teach positive behavior before it becomes out of control. So a good strategy is before the lesson even occurs, we're restating those expectations. When people are calm and cool and collected. Before providing our teaching lessons, we want to make sure kids are under control. Because if we start putting new information in that situation where they're already escalated, what we're going to get is we're going to get students that have cognitive overload. So I got to process this information, but I also have to calm myself, settle myself down. And so we got to get to that point. And so we're going to reduce the demands and we're going to get people back on track. So a good story is when I was a substitute. Substitute teacher, had a 7th grade social studies class. And oh my God, I hated subbing in that class. When I got the call, I really hope, I hope a water pipe broke in the school. I hope I didn't have to go to school today. Because it was not a good managed class, and kids were out of control, and it was just like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a struggle. And I didn't want the principal thinking less of me as a teacher. Because I knew going in that it was going to be chaotic, and I was like, what if the principal knows? What if the principal finds out he's going to think that I'm not a good teacher, that I don't know what I'm doing? And I don't want that to happen. And so my solution to that was I am going to be, because I saw, every teacher I saw that was good, they were strict. And I was like, well, okay, so I'm going to be strict. I'm going to, have tight routines. They're going to do this. If they don't do this, then I'll call their parent, those types of things. And we'll get things under control. Well, it didn't work. Kids were way out of control. And it didn't work for a lot of reasons. I mean, I felt like I was correcting all the time. I felt like I was drained. I was physically drained after those days. School was hard because it was like I felt like I was fighting with kids every day. And, I wasn't verbally fighting with them, but I just felt like I was correcting. And life is easier than this. And so, it really played a big role. And it didn't work very well at all. And the reason why it didn't work was that I didn't have a relationship. I didn't work to create that relationship first. I didn't start the day with a positive no. I didn't start doing those things positively. Also, it didn't work because what I was doing was I was trying to correct. I was trying to put my finger in the dam. And once I got one thing under control, the other thing out. Instead, what I needed to do was step back and regain control by being positive and reinforcing those positive things. And it was amazing to me. Now in my job, a lot of times I'll model for teachers. A lot of times I'll do those things. I'll come into the class. I'll try and teach a little bit. Some of it's for just my own personal benefit. Some of it's to help out a teacher. And, I go in a variety of rooms. Some are well managed, some are not. And those ones that are not, I feel pretty confident now. Going in, I feel empowered that this is chaos right now. And then sometimes I get a little worried still. I'm kind of like, oh man, I'm the behavioral specialist. And, they're looking to me. And if I don't do something, I'm going to, where's my credibility going to be? But every time, without fail, you come in, you do some of these tactics that we're talking about, you remove yourself, it is amazing the impact you can have. So, moral of the story, save it. If they become escalated or after an event occurs, don't teach it in the moment. Note it. Say, oh, that occurred. And then teach it before that happens the next day or before that happens in the next situation. Set them up for success and reinforce something good. Don't correct it in the moment. Don't correct it in the moment. Do these strategies instead. So these are strategies that I guess are correcting, but they're more indirect. And so they're not direct correcting, they're not direct teaching. So these are the ways of indirect going, and how do you de-escalate that behavior and get right in there. So note what happens before that behavior occurs, what happens after that behavior occurs, but don't do anything at the time. Teach that behavior in a different time when they're not escalated. And like I said, escalation does not mean kicking, does not mean out of control. It simply means that they weren't following direction, they're chaotic, they are, whatever. I mean, they're playing with a buddy. That's escalation. That contributes to their load. And it means their cognitive load isn't full. When they're calm, when they're collected, when they're doing what you ask them to do, that is de-escalation. Now we're going to talk about the big five. These are the key principles that keep small problems small. They're the principles of ignoring, redirecting, reframing, reinforcing, and modeling. By responding to problem behaviors in this way, we can free ourselves from that criticism trap we talked about and from correcting behavior in ways that allow us to preserve our positive relationship. So instead of creating a negative relationship, we're going to preserve that positive relationship, so kids are going to do what we want them to do, even when they're displaying negative behaviors. So these strategies may seem very direct and not immediately effective. So you may say that, man, how is that ever going to correct behavior? How is ignoring a behavior ever going to correct a behavior? They're not going to learn. Well, it's very indirect, and I know as a skills coach when I was doing these strategies, it felt indirect. It felt like I'm not doing enough to correct this behavior. But over time, with consistency, if you do these things and you promote these things while teaching other behaviors, and that is key, teaching those other behaviors, man, you can really develop skills that help students interact positively independently. And it is amazing. You can have kids that it's just like, oh my gosh, we have come so far, and the kid, they do it themselves. I don't have to do anything. This class does it themselves, and I don't even have to do anything. It's very, very cool. So, first one. First skill is ignoring. Ignoring undesirable behavior shows an active dislike for that behavior. And so we think of ignoring as passive, but really what it does is it shows actively that that behavior is so unimportant to me that I am not even going to pay attention to it. And when you pair ignoring with reinforcement, so I'm going to reinforce that you do right, and I'm going to actively ignore everything that you don't do right. It provides a feedback system that says this behavior is valued and this behavior is not. So if you're saying I ignore but it doesn't work, check your reinforcement. You may not be reinforcing enough. I was a youth skills coach for students in alternative settings, and we would meet, and initially they would want to talk about drugs, sex, things on the weekend, unhealthy things that they were used to talking about. They were used to talking about that with their peers. They were used to talking about that with their counselors. They were used to talking about that with their teachers, because people would say, oh, tell me about that. And then they would say, oh, you really shouldn't be doing that, and you shouldn't do this, and that's unhealthy for you. I ignored it. And we were taught to ignore it. My job was to ignore those behaviors and any other behaviors that were undesirable. Instead, we did healthy activities. We only talked about healthy things. And at first, kids didn't have anything to talk about. Their life was full of unhealthy activities. But what they found out was, I don't have much to talk about to a guy that I really like. Because we created a relationship. We were very positive. I modeled being a positive person and being a healthy person. And we only talked about those things. And pretty soon, we did a bunch of healthy activities. I got them connected to a bunch of healthy activities. Once they did that, we did not talk about drugs, sex, alcohol, any of those. They just didn't come up. They may have still happened. But they knew when they interacted with me that I didn't care for that. I didn't value that. And so why would they bring it up? They wouldn't, because they have a great relationship with me. If we could create that relationship with everybody in the world and show that those things are not desirable, these are desirable, these are the things we value, then we can really have a system that values healthy behavior and rewards healthy behavior. So the other thing I know that teachers are afraid of is exposure. If a kid says a cuss word in the class, oh my God, they're going to be exposed to it. Or fear that I just let a student get disrespecting me, and that's not okay. They told me to F off. They told me to whatever, and that is not acceptable, and I had to make it known that that's not acceptable. Well, here's the other philosophy. So when you do that, when you say that it's not acceptable, go to the office, get out of here, when they do something like that, you're saying that I valued your behavior. I so much importance on that behavior that I noticed it. That was so important to me that I noticed it. You're also modeling for other students in the class that you thought that behavior was important. Whereas, if you ignore it, and if you teach students to ignore it, and we actively teach students to ignore it, we play the concentration game where, I'll go into that a little bit, but if you actively teach students to ignore those behaviors, you're saying that behavior is so unimportant to us. Well, it's just like talking about sex, drugs, anything. You come in, that behavior is so unimportant to me, we aren't even going to talk about it. We aren't even going to notice it. We're going to go on with our positive, healthy activities, and you're either going to fall in line or you're not going to get any attention. And once kids do something positive, then you jump all over it. So that kid that said a cuss word, that kid that said F off, simply ignore it. And then once they do something positive, go on with your day. Once they do something positive, boom, you're all over it. You're praising like crazy, and you're saying, that's what's valued here. And you're teaching kids, especially kids that come from backgrounds that are not used to that. You're teaching them that that is what's valued here. It may, that other stuff may be valued in your home life. But what's valued here is that. And so we talk about the concentration game, I said, about teaching kids how to actively ignore. And I've done all kinds of crazy things. And so basically what we do is we time the students to ignore behavior. And so we task to read quietly or whatever and ignore problem behavior. And I'm the problem behavior kid. And so I'll do all kinds of stuff. If it's a middle school class, I'll comment that they like someone. I'll, take books off the shelf. I'll mess up desks. One time I tried to climb out a window. There's all kinds of stuff. And we teach them to actively ignore those things. And we time them and we say, all right, let's see if you can beat your time. And we build that skill. It's very much a skill. And so teachers, you need to have that skill too. And so you say, well, but what if we can't ignore it? What if it's not like it's not like a cuss word where they just yell out something and I can ignore it? What if it's like just this long drawn out thing that just keeps disrupting the classroom? They just keep talking and talking, and it's like, oh man, it's driving me nuts. Then we employ my favorite method, and that is redirect or the swerve. And the swerve is an excellent tool because kids that they keep going even when you ignore it, they want attention, but you don't want to give attention to that negative thing they're doing. So what do? I need to give them attention, but not for that negative thing. We redirect. And so when you think about redirecting, this is my favorite strategy, that we correct negative behavior by eliciting a positive behavior. So a good example is if a teacher having students respond and one keeps blurting out answers, and this behavior should be ignored. The student shouldn't be rewarded for the attention for blurting out. We should just ignore it. But man, it's really distracting. So a strategy that we should do is that, that behavior is ignored, but I might set him up for a positive behavior. So if he's participating but doing it inappropriately, I might, the next time there's an opportunity to respond, pick him out and say, all right, John, I need you to respond to this next. Get ready for it. Get ready. Are you ready? And then we'd do it, and then I'd say, all right, John, go. And then boom, and I would reinforce that behavior. And so I'd give him his positive reinforcement, his attention that he needs. But I would do it in a way that says, I'm going to contrive a situation that allows you to be reinforced. Another good example is that I think, the reason why I call it the swerve is the squirrel example. So again, I was a skills coach driving kids around, and they would talk about drugs, sex, whatever. And, I just keep talking about it, and I keep ignoring it. But I was like, man, we really got to change the subject so I can reinforce some positive things here. And so one strategy is the redirected strategy is, we'd be going down the road, and I lived in Oregon, and there's a lot of squirrels in Oregon. But whether there was or wasn't a squirrel, I'd look to see if the kid was paying attention. If he was looking at me and just talking, I'd swerve a little bit. And then I'd say, whoa. And then he'd say, whoa, what happened? And I said, did you see that squirrel? And he goes, no. And then I'd say, hey, look at that Taco John's, or look at that, burrito place. I said, you ever eat there? Or I would say, what kind of music do you like? And then we'd start talking about music, or we'd start talking about a good burrito place in town, or we'd start talking about something completely different, the movies, whatever. But we would just change that so that it was more positive conversation. I wouldn't even address that he was talking about those things that he shouldn't be talking about. And then we'd change it to be more positive, and then I could reinforce like crazy. So thinking of creative ways to do that in your classroom is very powerful. If a kid is escalated, I might comment on their red shirt, or I might comment on something that they have or that they've done, and I'd say, tell me about this, tell me more about that. And then once I do that, then I quickly switch it to make it a positive thing, or doing what we're supposed to do. Another one that I've used is kid was, wouldn't do his work. I said, I really like the red shirt you have on. Where'd you get it? He's like, oh, I don't know. I said, you ever play tic-tac-toe? We played a couple games of tic-tac-toe, and then I made my request to go back to class. And he did it no problem, because I was able to create a positive relationship and positively reinforce. I did the 5-to-1, so I got 5, 5, 5, and then a simple request back to class. He was more likely to do it. Oops. And so the next one is finding positive exceptions to habits. And so, you got kids that are tapping their pencil. You got kids that, I guess another one is that they self-correct when they're reading all the time, or they're not reading fluently, or things like that. You can find positive exceptions. And so when they model that good behavior, oftentimes they'll tap their pencil. Oftentimes they will self-correct when they're reading. But when they're reading fluently, when they're working without tapping their pencil, when they're doing those things, jump all over that and really give good positive praise. Great use for things with habits. And use failure as teaching experiences. So Kim tells you that a student took her ball at recess and she lost it. She yelled at him. As a result, she lost the privilege of playing with the ball. She's pretty upset about it. Instead, you could acknowledge that others don't always ask politely for things, and offer help to practice more appropriate ways to handle it. So you can say, man, that happens, and here's some strategies to deal with it. So those are the 4 things to reframe. Next one, reinforce. We've talked about this. It's not going away. Still the same thing. So we got ignore, redirect, reframe, reinforce. And the last one is model. You have to show kids what you want them to see. Staying calm and collected in crisis is a great way. Ignoring negative behavior, another great way. Reinforcing others, teaching them how to be positive, another great way. Being healthy yourself is another great way. Using other students as models. Bring them in, those great students, or even those not so great students, when they are behaving great, them as models. This is where students can become leaders. Those great kids, what we mentioned earlier from that teacher, this is where you can bring them in. They can be leaders, and I would even say, every kid can be a leader. So don't just pick the great ones to model. Pick the great ones to model and show them off and do that. That's awesome. But also pick the guy that never gets any recognition to model when he does something well. Say, oh yeah, that is how you do it. Show me again. Show me again. Do it again. And have the class celebrate that. That is all right and okay. It's also a great way for kids to practice positive relationships. And so a thing that I do a lot is, if I'm teaching classroom behavior, I'm teaching kids that the most important thing that I look for is supporting others in a positive way. And I tell them, you can support others in a positive way by modeling and by saying good positive things about people. And if I'm focusing on that throughout my day, I'm creating positive relationships within peer groups. And that's for all people. That's for even the kid that misbehaves all the time. He should feel a part of this class. And it's your job as a student, and it's my job as a teacher to make that happen. And if we teach kids that, we can teach them how to create a positive community in every life they're in. And if you do it effectively, you can create a classroom of independence and natural reinforcement. If we teach peers how to ignore and how to reinforce and how to model good behavior, and we celebrate those things as a teacher, we're not managing the class. Students are. We're providing the direction for, the lesson or the whatever we're teaching. But as far as behavior goes, they're self-regulators. They do it on their own. If you can create that community, it can be very powerful and make your job so easy. So the big five, you have to know them like the back of your hand. Ignore, redirect, reinforce, reframe, and model. Those things you have to know, and you have to practice, and be fluent in them. And it never goes away. You still continue to practice those. When kids become escalated, even when they don't, use them every day, all day long, in your life, in school and outside of school. And it takes time, but if you make it a habit and be consistent, oh man, you can really change how people react and just make your experiences so much more pleasurable. Make sure you role play with your colleagues and you're comfortable practicing with them. That should be a safe environment. If we're doing positive behavior, it should always be a safe environment. None of us want to practice these new skills in front of each other. It's hard, you mess up, and we don't want to do that, but it's really important to do that. It's really important to sit live, because I can't tell you how nervous I always am about employing those things, and now they're becoming second nature for me. And when they're second nature like that, then you could do it in front of anybody, anytime, anywhere. And that's how it should be, because you never know when problem behavior is going to sneak up and occur. So it can be hard of our letting go to want to correct a lot of minor behaviors, and we feel like if we do that, kids aren't going to know the consequences, and they're not going to know these things. There are consequences for that behavior, and the consequence is that, you don't get the payoff. And if you can teach that, and you can teach them that, and that positive environment is reinforcing enough that, doing a positive thing that way outweighs doing a negative thing. And it doesn't mean that we need to make it so much harder to get reinforcement. There's some stuff we need to do to limit reinforcement. But really, we need to up our reinforcement for positive things. And if you do that and you have it way upped, life is easy. Remember, teaching positive behavior happens before negative behavior occurs. So not in the moment. We always want to teach in the moment or after the moment. We want to say, that's when we should teach behavior. No, we teach positive behavior just like we teach reading, just like we teach math, just like we teach whatever. We are going to teach it all day long, and we are going to prevent behavior from occurring. And we are going to teach kids how to be independent, how to do those things. That's what we're going to do, but we're going to do it before the behavior happens. When problem behavior does occur, use these strategies to de-escalate, and use brief strategies. These ones we didn't talk about. There's not a lot of talking on. You don't sit down and talk to them about the problem. You just kind of go through it, and you do a lot of modeling and a lot of redirecting and ignoring. And then you teach behaviors at another time. But I promise you, kids will be more well-adjusted. They will exhibit way better behavior. You're going to encourage things like honesty and empathy and integrity and all those types of things that are very positive and very powerful characteristics. Grit, all those things, independence. That's what you're going to do if you take this approach, as opposed to other approaches where you're managing the behavior. If you're managing the behavior, you're not teaching those things. And so it's really, really important that you take this approach. Our homework. Our homework is to greet students at the door. We saw how powerful that is. Practice the 5. And then bring back information. How did it work? When did you use it? What did you use? What was their reaction? How did you handle that situation? When do you notice you could use a multiple thing? And and what's your feeling about them? What was your feeling when you ignored that behavior that you thought, this is way out of hand and it needs to be corrected, but you ignored it? What happened? But try stepping back from behavior, whether it's a whole class or an individual student. And how did that feel? How did that feel when you were in a moment where I can't control this behavior, and you step back and you say it's all right? It should relieve. It should provide some relief and really feel the need of correcting behavior. It should relieve that and yourself when you are correcting and note when you correct it. So catch yourself when you're in that mode of correcting behavior. Catch, what did you say? What did you do? Did you catch yourself? How many times did you do it? Try and record those things if you can. And as always, check out Beyond the Belt. There's a lot of good positive behavior stuff in there, as well as some other stuff. And I always post on there, and it's really a great resource for people. The more likes, comments, and posts we get, the more people we reach, and the more positive behavior community we can support. And so, thank you.